You guys are listening to the Confronting Christianity podcast, and I'm here with my friend Vaneetha Risner. You guys may remember the conversation I had with Vaneetha back in 2024 when we did an episode titled "Why Does God Let Us Suffer?" And I actually had a lot of really great feedback from listeners on that episode in particular. Vaneetha, I forget if I mentioned it at the time, but people who'd found it really helpful, what you had to say then. And we're going to be talking today on a similar theme, but with a little bit of a different angle, because Vaneetha's written a new book called Watching for Morning and Desperate for Hope, a 7-week study on the topic of suffering from a Christian perspective. So, Vaneetha, I would love first for listeners to hear a little bit of your story. I know some of it will be a bit of a recap from things that we talked about back in 2024, but for those who are coming in fresh, a little bit of a recap on sort of how you came to faith in Jesus, why questions of suffering have been particularly pertinent and pressing in your life, and then we'll dive into this book in particular.
Okay, that sounds great. I'll start at the beginning, but I will rush through it. But I was born in India. And when I was 3 months old, I got polio. Now, I didn't have the vaccine because in India, they don't usually give it at 3 months old. They give it at 6 months old. But polio had been eradicated long before, or almost eradicated. So the doctors had no idea what it was. So they thought I had typhoid, gave me cortisone, which spread through my body. The polio spread through my body. And within a few days, I was a quadriplegic. And then they recognized that I had polio. So my parents were in India. My dad was a professor, and they basically told my parents, you have to leave India if you want any kind of medical care.
Hmm.
So we left India, moved to England, actually, and then moved
Great place.
to, yes, exactly. And then moved to Canada. And I had my first surgery in England, but I had most of my surgeries in Canada. And lived in the hospital when I was a child. I was in the hospital for 9 months straight when I was 7 years old in a body cast. So 21 operations, sorry, by the time I was 13. So just a lot of surgeries. And quite frankly, I was so angry at God. Like my parents were Christians, and all their friends would come and talk to me about these, like, trust God and God has a plan for your life. And honestly, it would make me so angry because it was like, I'm lying in a bed or I am being bullied. I was bullied a lot in school. And just hearing people talk about the fact that God was good and God had a plan just frustrated me because I felt like it's easy for people to say that when their lives look pretty, but when their lives don't, it felt harder. And so didn't have any faith in God. I thought if God existed, he couldn't be good. But yet when I was in high school, I got involved in FCA. So FCA is Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I was not an athlete or a Christian, but I wanted to fellowship with the athletes, Rebecca. So I was there. And a friend of mine and I would sit in the back and we would just talk about boys. And then one day she came home and she said, God is real. And I remember just being terrified. Like I thought she's going to want to talk about God all the time. And for those of you who don't know God and all your friends are talking about God, it's really frustrating at times. Like you're like, can we talk about something else? And she could not talk about something else. So every time she would be like, so what do you think about this? And just share what she'd learned. So I remember going home and just saying, okay, God, if you're real, show me. And it was a bit of an arrogant kind of prayer. I wasn't saying it in a really respectful way. I mean, I wasn't totally disrespectful, but I was like, I don't think you're real. And if you're real, like, why did you do this? Went to bed, nothing happened. Miraculously, woke up the next morning and just kind of was flipping through a Bible that I had gotten when I was confirmed in church. Not a believer, but a church that you didn't have to be a believer to be confirmed. And so had my Bible, opened the plastic, flipped it open, and I was like, okay, God, talk to me. And started in Leviticus, and there was not a lot.
Classic place to start.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, okay, this is what I always thought. Flipped through a few more times, and then I just said to God, why? If you're good, why did this happen? And I flipped open to John 9. when the disciples are talking to Jesus and they see a man who was blind from birth, and the disciples ask Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?
Mm.
And Jesus says it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the work of God would be displayed in his life.
Mm.
And I realized God was talking to me. Like I had asked this why question, really like the disciples, like, what have I done? What have my
Mm.
parents done? Why did this happen? And Jesus took that why question, and rather than why, what have I done, but why, what is the purpose? And
Mm.
that was a very different question. And recognizing that God heard my question, knew me, and was going to use my life, glorify himself through my life, gave me this much bigger purpose than I ever thought. And so I knelt down by the side of my bed and I committed my life to a God I did not know,
Hmm.
but I was certain knew me. So, yeah, that's how I came to Christ.
I'm curious, Vanessa, were you reading through John's Gospel, or did you just
No.
like happen
Oh,
to flip
no.
to
This
John
is
9?
exactly what I tell people not to do. So I
Right.
remember flipping through Leviticus and Isaiah and then just landed on John 9. I mean, it was a random flipping through. So that's not usually the best way to do it. You can start reading sequentially, but I was not doing that. Yeah. So, but God turned the page for me. So, but often I find it's people just being willing to say, God, if you're real, show me, and then looking around. And I think God often speaks in different ways, but if we're not looking, we won't hear. And I find that even now with my prayers, sometimes I'll pray for wisdom, I'll ask God for all these things, and then I totally forget. And I get up and I don't recognize that God could be answering me in lots of different ways.
Yeah, yeah. No, I certainly have that that experience as well of just taking things for granted.
Yeah.
And as soon as I prayed for one thing and the Lord has actually graciously answered that prayer, to be like, oh, but this is what I want now. Like
Yes.
almost like the child who sort of gets the thing and then suddenly doesn't want the thing anymore because it was the other thing that they, really
Exactly.
wanted. If the Lord had actually been listening, um, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, Vaneetha. Maybe before we jump in, or kind of, I'm sure some of it is covered in your forthcoming book as well. Of what do we do if we are followers of Jesus? What do we do about those times when we are persistently praying for God to do something which, as far as we can tell, is very much kind of in line with His will? It's not like we're sort of praying, Lord, please give me the opportunity to commit adultery today. But like instead, maybe we're praying, Lord, please, I'm desperate to have a baby. Friends who've walked through infertility, and Lord, please would I be able to conceive, perfectly godly prayer. Or Lord, please would you heal this friend of mine? Or Lord, please would you open this friend who doesn't know Jesus's eyes to see who you are? Like a prayer very much in line with what we can understand of God's will. How should we think about those times when we might pray again and again and again for days or weeks or months or years and not hear the answer that we are looking for?
Mm, that's a great question. I would say that I have experienced that multiple times in my life through little things, but also huge things. Like I had a son who had a heart problem at 7 weeks old. We took him to the doctor. He took him off his medicine just because he thought my son was doing so well. And in the middle of the night, 3 days later, he stopped breathing and we called 911. And I remember getting on my knees. My husband went with our son to the ER and I begged God. Like I begged God like I have never begged God before. And just sort of bargaining, like I'll teach Bible study the rest of my life. I'll do all these things. I've been faithful. I was teaching Bible study. And there was this sense sort of that of course God's going to do this. This is a God honoring prayer. And my son died that night. And it it's what I would tell people is like it we don't know what God is doing, and sometimes we're just going to have to cry. Like I don't want to put I kind of call these like a Jesus sticker on it. Like, okay, if you trust God, it's going to feel good. It's going to be fine. And we know that God is so much bigger than we are, that we do pray prayers that are godly prayers and that are not answered. And God does have reasons for that. It's not that he doesn't, but I don't think we have to understand them. And they're just mysterious. So why somebody who doesn't want to have children has lots of kids and somebody who desperately wants a child struggles with infertility. And also, for my own life, I also went through an unwanted divorce. And I remember feeling like that was the godliest thing, like bring my husband to repentance, bring him back, bring our family back. I'm a believer. He was involved in the church. Like, this is for your name. And so I felt like, even more than my son's death, I felt like this is your name on the line, Lord. Like, this brings shame to the Christian community and to your name. And yet, and that was the only way I knew how to pray, Rebecca, was like, this, I want this. And I know this is what you want to. And one of the things that I learned that I write about in this devotional is our faith. We can't cling to an outcome. We have to cling to God. And I feel like so many times I cling to the outcome because it seems like a godly one. And I forget that I'm really clinging to God.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and in light of that, if somebody's listening to us and thinking, I mean, fine, go ahead, cling to God if that floats your boat, kind of thing. But why would you trust this God who hasn't answered your prayers at key moments in your life? Like, what is it about God's character that makes you think that He's even trustworthy in these contexts? What would you say to somebody who's listening to us and thinking that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, after my son died, that was my question too. Was like, why should I trust you, God? Like, I begged you, and you didn't do anything. And I learned two things. One, that God wants us to bring our honest questions to Him, and I think before that, I didn't think God wanted that. But I really learned that we need to just say exactly how we feel to God and pour out our hearts. And we see that throughout the Bible, which was really interesting. I had never focused on that before because I thought God just wanted us to be happy and sing praise songs all the time. And yet, when you look in the Bible, there's really hard things that have happened to people, and they are not afraid to tell God. And those are the people whose faith is stronger and who really get more connected to God.
Mm.
And I would say, for me personally, in terms of, yeah, why would I have faith in God? God has met me in crazy ways, just like when I mentioned when I came to Christ. Like, there was just this sense that God was speaking to me when I opened the Bible. And after Paul died, I remember kind of crying out to God, like, I don't know what to do with this. I had not read my Bible in a long time. I hadn't walked away from faith, Rebecca, but I would say that I leaned away. I didn't want to look at God.
Yeah.
And yet I sensed God, God's love and God's presence. And it's a really hard thing to explain, but I knew that God would never leave me. And there was just this sense of joy, even in the midst of the hardest things, that I can't explain except for the presence of God in my life.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think often when people think, understandably, think that the reality of suffering in our lives and in the world around us is a sort of evidence against Christianity. How can you say there's this loving God who is in control, and yet we see all these terrible things happening? I think it's easy to forget two things there. Like, one is that right at the center of the Christian faith is the unjust death of an innocent man who is suffering in extraordinary ways beyond, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional. The suffering that Jesus endured on the cross is sort of beyond our ability even to fathom. So one thing we know from that is that it's not that God doesn't understand and He doesn't care. He cared enough. If the Christian story is true, He cared enough to send His Son to die for us. And I think the other thing is that, let's say there is no God. Like, let's pull all of this down and say there is no God. Jesus isn't the Son of God who came to die for you and me. We're living in a meaningless, utterly pointless world where your life doesn't matter, my life doesn't matter. Our suffering is pure kind of detritus on the cosmic scale. Like it's, nobody cares. In fact, our sense of ourselves as coherent beings who can suffer is purely imaginary, and not, it's no more real than the suffering that we might imagine a kind of an ant going through if you trod on an ant. Like we're essentially in the same sort of category. And so it's I feel a little bit like one of Jesus' disciples, Peter, who when Jesus, a lot of people are leaving Jesus and he turns to his disciples and says, "You guys going to leave as well?" And Peter says, "Well, where else should we go? You have the words of eternal life. Like, let's look at the other look at the other accounts that we can have for suffering."
Oh, yeah.
And when we do, I think actually a faith built around this man who died on a cross starts to look a whole lot more appealing than some of the other options.
I mean, I cannot imagine going through all the things I did without knowing that Christ was with me, without reading the Bible, seeing that other people have been through that and how God comforted them and the words I can use to pray. Like, I think when people feel like it's completely meaningless and there is no God, that feels like the darkest place you could possibly be. And I have had friends who have walked away from faith in suffering, and yet I feel like they went through the hardest part and they never got the good part, which is the fellowship with Christ, which is really better. The fellowship I've had in suffering, this may sound super radical, but is better than any joy I've had. Like there is something about knowing that the God of the universe is right there with you and is walking with you that is indescribably precious.
I was going to say my favorite Bible passage, but actually, even as those words come out of my mouth, I think of the other rivals. It's like having children and being like, well, all my children are my favorite, depending on which one I'm looking at the time. But there's this passage in John's Gospel, in chapter 11, which I talk about kind of ad nauseam anytime I get a chance. But it's when Jesus has been called by two of his friends, Mary and Martha, because their brother Lazarus is very sick. Jesus intentionally waits until he's dead before he shows up, which, tells you something interesting if you read through that passage. But he then meets with Martha, who comes out to meet him, and ends up saying to her those extraordinary words, "I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me, even though he dies, will live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" And it's in the context of her profound suffering, having just lost her brother, and having just lost her brother, and knowing that Jesus could have healed him if he'd come, and knowing that Jesus didn't come, that Jesus then meets her in this really special and intimate way. Which is, I just was thinking of that when you were saying that you feel like you've experienced fellowship with the Lord in a particularly profound way in the deepest sort of troughs of suffering that you've been through.
Yeah. You know what I also love about that story, Rebecca, is so he meets Martha with truth because she needs to hear that. But then Mary says the exact same words, her sister, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And he meets her with tears. He doesn't really say anything beyond, tears with her. And it just shows that Jesus knows what we need. Some of us need truth and need to hear words. And some of us need to know that Jesus weeps with us.
Yeah. And we probably all need both of those things at different times.
Yes, exactly.
That it's kind of, yeah. Vaneetha, you were saying before we press record that right after you'd signed to write this book, Watching for Morning, that you had then unexpectedly experienced another significant bout of suffering. Love to hear a little more about that and how that then shaped the book that you ended up writing.
Yeah. So I signed a book contract and I thought, okay, I'm going to write a devotional with some of my favorite little kind of summaries of things I've written for other other places. I write a blog. So I felt pretty good about it. And I thought, I'm going to just kind of sit back and have a lot of thoughts that I've pulled together over the last 10 years of writing, or 15. And then they found out, first of all, I fell several times, which really kind of messed up my back. But then I developed a cyst on my spine, which ended up attaching to my nerve. So I couldn't walk. And I was in a wheelchair for 14 months
Gosh.
and was in massive pain, like sleeping, walking all the time. And then I got a thyroid condition where 60% of my hair fell out, which that was pretty upsetting. And then I got some stomach condition. Then we got moths ate all my wool sweaters in my closet, which doesn't sound like suffering, but it was to me. And then termites ate the supports in our garage because of the way our house was built. I mean, it was thing after thing after thing, Rebecca. And I just, at times, I thought I got COVID right after my daughter's wedding, as 6 weeks of brain fog in bed, like horrible. And I thought, why did I ever sign up for this? Like
Yeah.
I really did. Like so many times I thought, can I back out of this? Like I can't even think. Like, how can I even pull this together? Like I would sit in front of the computer and just think, I'm in so much pain and this is just so hard. I can't do this. And so it was a different experience than writing anything else I've ever written, because I really had to depend on God. And it was the book that I most felt like I had it. Like, I got this.
Yeah.
I'm just summarizing things. I've got it. And it was so different from that. And I did summarize some things that I had written before, but I wrote a lot of rawer things than I usually write. Like I was telling Rebecca, I like to write about processed pain. Like
Yeah.
I'm not going to write about something that just happened yesterday, because I don't have enough perspective to be writing on like social media or on a blog about something that I haven't even brought to the Lord, really figured out. And so maybe that says something about me, but I just don't like to process publicly. And yet I wrote some laments in this book and shared things from journal entries that I was like, should I be doing this? I haven't had enough time to sit with it, but I prayed a lot about it and felt like, okay, I'm going to do this, because I think when we hear from people's processed pain, it can have depth to it, but it may not feel as real. And I think that's often what people say about Christians is they're not real. And I wanted to show, like, we can be real and we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
show. I felt desperate. I mean, there was several times when I didn't have anything happy to say. I didn't have a bow, but I felt like God met me in that too. And interestingly, those are the uh, entries that people have commented on more, because I think people can relate to that, like feeling hopeless and desperate. And where is God in this? And I don't know where to turn.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I remember for many years of my Christian life feeling like the best way that I can sort of point people to the goodness and truth of the Christian faith is by appearing to have no problems of my own.
Yeah.
Like sort of everything is great. I can help other people with their problems, but I certainly like don't have any issues of my own. Um, and it was years before I realized, no, actually, that's not it. Like it's not that I need to present the sort of shiniest version of myself, because at the end of the day, we're talking here about a God who knows you and me in the most intimate way, including knowing like all the worst of us. Not only the suffering that we've gone through, but also like the worst of our sin, like the thoughts that go through my mind and yours, which if they were projected onto the screen, or sort of transcript going up, we would both be kind of running. I think 'cause it's just
Yes.
it's a terrifying thought, but that this God who knows us in that way still loves us, and that we, part of what we recognize if we trust in Jesus is that we're actually so sinful and so kind of messed up that we needed the Son of God to die for us. We didn't just sort of need a little extra moral instruction or whatever. Like
Right.
we needed a radical intervention, and that's true of everybody around us as well. And so, when Christians act in really obviously sinful ways that are destructive to others, or as you were mentioning earlier, kind of bring dishonor on the name of Christianity in their place. Like those things are actually things that the Bible has an account for. Like it's not.
Mm.
In some ways, we shouldn't be surprised by the depth of our sin or anybody else's. And that I think often what people need to see is that Jesus is there when things aren't going well, when we don't have it together, when either we've made terrible mistakes or we're going through seasons of serious suffering, and it's not pretty, but it's real, and that there's a hope that we can have. I love the expression "desperate for hope" that
Yeah.
you've included in your book. Maybe let's talk a little bit about that. What as a Christian do you see as the hope that you can find in the midst of suffering, whether it's the sort of more epic kind or the daily strains of having all your wool sweaters being eaten by moths? like
that felt like serious suffering, I have to
Yeah.
say. But yeah, I feel like the hope we have is, ultimately, just as we've talked about, kind of in the person of Jesus, and recognizing that for all of us, He's with us in our suffering. He cares about that. And that there's a purpose in it. Like, we don't know what it is, but it's not meaningless. And
Mm.
I think people who don't believe in God, like, everything is just kind of like goes to the universe. Like, well, I don't know why this happened. Some people have good luck in their lives and some people have bad. For some religions, it's if you did something bad in your past life, then you've got, you're paying
Mm.
back for that. So there's really no sympathy for people who are going through hard things. But for us, we have this knowledge that um, God will do something with our suffering. And we may not see it right now, but it is not meaningless. And that was the biggest truth that I that changed my view of my own suffering, I would say. After my son died, I really hadn't heard that idea that God measures our suffering, that God has a purpose to everything that happens in our lives. And I remember reading a book by Johnny Erickson Tata, When God Weeps, and she says in it, either God rules or Satan sets the world's agenda. And God is relegated to being Satan's cleanup boy. So, whatever happens to you wasn't his best for you. It wasn't plan A. And maybe he could bring good out of it, but it wasn't really what he wanted. And when I read that, I remember thinking, that's kind of how I had felt. Like,
Mm.
oh, maybe God can bring good out of it, but Satan's behind this. And when I recognized that, Satan isn't behind it in terms of, like, Satan might be the immediate cause, but there is nothing that happens to us that is apart from God's will. And that is really what's given me hope in the huge, massive things that I've talked about and the everyday things like my sweaters and the termites in that are thankfully gone. But the hard things, like when you have a headache and you have to go give a talk or you have to drive or you have to go do things, and thinking like this is just bad luck feels, I I think it's harder for me to handle than when I recognize, okay, God has brought this in and there's something I can learn from this hard thing that's
Mm.
happening right
Yeah.
now. And I have a word for the year every year. And one year I had a phrase and it was God is using this. And I feel like that has helped me so much, recognizing whatever it is, whatever hard thing we're going through, our kids are going through, which is often so hard to watch somebody else
Mm.
suffer, and like why are they having to suffer, and recognizing there is hope in knowing there's a purpose.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Yeah, I was thinking of there's a story in the Old Testament in the book of Exodus when this guy Joseph, his brothers sell him into slavery. Like the plan A was killing him because they were sick of him, but they thought, oh, you know what, we might as well make some money off this guy. So rather than just killing him, we'll sell him as a slave. Great brotherly move there. Um, and then towards the end of that story narrative, when Joseph, having been sold as a slave and taken into Egypt, ends up being able to rescue his entire family from starvation, essentially, as well as rescuing like thousands of other people because of the way that he was able to manage things. And he says to his brothers when he sort of re-meets them, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. And I feel like that's such a sort of helpful biblical paradigm for us to say, when we say the God of all the universe is actually in control, we're not saying everything that happens is, God willed that in the sense of it was a good thing, because it was absolutely an evil thing that Joseph's brothers did to him, but that what they intended for evil, he intended for good, and that we can see even when we can't see it in the moment, and sometimes we won't see it until after the end of our lives, but we can be confident that what human beings might intend for evil, that God intends for good, and that we see that supremely at the cross when Jesus dies. In some ways, yeah, that's Satan feeling like he's having a field day. In some ways, it's the Roman soldiers and the religious leaders who are presiding over Jesus' death, sinning and acting against God's will. But also, it was so much God's plan that he'd been planning it since before the foundation of the world, and it's the act through which he brings anyone who will come to Jesus into fellowship with him. So we sort of have both those things together.
Yeah.
Vaneetha, I'm curious, what's your theme word or verse for the year this year? I've never had one, so I'm just kind of fascinated by
this year my word is see. And it's that I want to see Jesus in everything. And I want to see myself more honestly. And I want to see others more charitably.
I like that. Do you develop these on January 1st, or
Yeah. Well, I actually kind of often when I'm reading the Bible in the morning or listening to somebody talk and they say a word that just kind of hits me, I start writing it down way before. And then kind of in December, I start sort of praying through what is it that I want to focus on. So it's kind of a process. I mean, there have been years, December 31, I'm panicking, I have no word.
The word for the year is nothing.
Yes, exactly. It's a blank year, but I find it way better than New Year's resolutions, which I used to do, and I didn't remember them or keep them. So one word has helped me kind of focus on what is it that I want to see or be different this year.
Yeah, a couple of friends with whom we've ended up sort of giving each other New Year's resolutions. The people who know you really well, and they're like, do you know what your New Year's resolution should be? Here it is. Which is sort of, it's what you need.
So what's your New Year's resolution, Rebecca? What were you given?
Well, actually, this year I foolishly tried to come up with my own, which was exercising more. Which, actually in some ways I had a really strong start, and then February travel hit and everything went downhill from there. But yeah, I'm trying to get back in that saddle, and yeah, actually finding I've never really enjoyed exercise. People say, "Oh, I feel so good after exercise," and I'm like, "Well, great. I feel tired." I feel like I don't get the high that other people seem to get. But I think maybe I'm just not trying hard enough. Maybe that's it. Vaneetha, as people consider grabbing a copy of your book, Watching for Morning, what would you say is a way that you would envisage them using this book? I know some people will be familiar with a 7-week study kind of model, or a multi-week study. Others might be very new to reading the Bible. How would you envisage somebody using this book in their own life?
Yeah. Well, there's actually two things. One, I have a Bible study, which is Desperate for Hope, which is a 7-week study, and that takes you through seven. It's actually 6 questions that we ask in suffering. If God loves me, why did this happen? And then this latest book is Watching for the Morning, which is 90 devotionals, and so it really. I wrote it for to be accessible to anybody. So you just
Mm.
pick it up. It has like a verse on the top, and then it has a short devotional. They're each like the devotionals themselves are like 450 words. And then there's a prompt of something to do, like, reflect on this, think about this question. So it doesn't take long. And so it's really good for people who maybe aren't familiar with the Bible and don't know where to start and just feel like in their own lives that life has been hard and they're not ready to dive into some deep theological book, but just something that says, okay, how do I start thinking about God in the midst of my suffering?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
the
great.
second chapter is, do you think God is low key savage? Which is a phrase that my daughter taught me when I heard her on the phone saying, "Yeah, sometimes God is low key savage," and I'm like, "What? What does that mean?" So that's one of the devotionals. Do you think God is low key savage? So
That's great. Yeah. So for people who maybe don't yet have like a daily Bible reading habit or aren't yet setting aside sort of daily time to pray, this could be a great on ramp for them to grab Watching for Morning and to see what happens over, I guess, 3 months. It's sort of 90 days.
yes, it's 90 days. Yes, so they have scriptures for people to memorize. If you've never done that before, it might be helpful just to find one and just commit it to memory.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for joining me again, Vaneetha. I really appreciate it. You guys have been listening to the Confronting Christianity podcast. You can grab either Watching for Morning, the devotional we were just talking about, or Desperate for Hope, which is a more in-depth 7-week study on suffering by Vaneetha. You can also check out her work at vaneetha.com. I love that you have a sufficiently distinctive name that you can just do that. I like Rebecca.com would not fly.
Yeah.
But-
Well, my daughter says it's the most narcissistic website possible.
Oh,
so there's
come
that.
on. I was a fan of your daughter a minute ago, and I'm not so sure.
Yeah. It is the same one who said God is low-key savage. So,
Okay, well, you. All our daughters have the best and worst moments.
Yes.
But yeah, check out Vaneetha's work at vaneetha.com. She's not remotely narcissistic. And I've appreciated our conversations both in real life, Vaneetha, and on this strange format of a podcast, and feel like I'm storing up some of your insights for the future. Right now, I feel like I'm in a season of unwarranted sort of happiness in my life, and there have been past seasons that have been way harder, and I guarantee that there will be future seasons that will be way harder as well. And if you, like me, are somebody who's going through a season of particular ease and happiness, then don't lull yourself into a false sense of security of thinking this is going to be the rest of your life, because it isn't. I can say that with confidence, almost regardless of who you are or where you're coming from spiritually. And thinking through these questions, both in your mind and even in your heart, before suffering hits, is incredibly valuable. So really appreciate you, Vaneetha, giving us some insights there, and as well as I'm sure providing words of hope for those who are in the absolute midst of suffering right now. And until you guys listen again to the Confronting Christianity podcast, I pray that your week will be one that is marked not just by happiness or by things going well, but marked by a real sense of relationship with the God of all the universe, who made himself known to us in the person of Jesus Christ.